All right, we're going to begin with chapter 2. Hopefully you guys have gotten started. You have watched the syllabus and you understand the course and you have gotten through chapter 1 and hopefully read chapter 2. This is a little bit about the history of human development and all the theories. Here we go again, guys, with theories. You guys should be really prepared for the CPC and the NCE by the time this is all over and done with. But those historical perspectives are really important. So the progression of childhood and what the lifespan meant in different parts of our history. So historical perspectives. So childhood in the Middle Ages was very different. Children were basically just little adults, and by age 7 they were expected to work, and by 12 most were married. But that had a lot to do with the mortality rate and the lifespan. So the average lifespan back in the Middle Ages was between 30 and 40 years. And also infant mortality was really high, so attachment was really low because limited survival. Then we move into children in the 18th and 19th centuries. This is when the views on childhood education began to change and started to think about educating children more. Then the Puritan era came with John Locke, and that children were born as a blank slate, a tabula rasa. They are born with innate ideas, and that knowledge is determined by experience and perception. And that the Christian doctrine and the original sin says all infants are born with the hereditary stain left behind from Adam's sin. So all children inherited the propensity to sin. So it was the parents' responsibility to make sure they raise them correctly and provide discipline. And then we have, of course, the Industrial Revolution. And I know we all remember this from early in our own educations, but children would have to work long, long hours. They were easier to deal with. They were more docile. And gosh, children as young as I think 4 would have to go into the mines and go work. And so clearly that was not a good idea, right? And so, and then with the Industrial Revolution became the new child labor laws. So at some point, then the labor laws came into effect, and children, the view of children as worthless and expensive, started to be seen in the 20th century there as having children for love and affection, that they're important, etc. So that's starting to transition until in the 21st century, children are a priority. We completely respect and love and believe that children should have the best life they can, and that they are fundamentally different from adults for a very long time, up until perhaps even 26, 24, 26. I mentioned that in my earlier lecture about the drug court, 18 to 24 being such a difficult age to treat because of the development of the brain. So there's a little fact that I threw in again if you want something to reference in your forum response. So I know that you watched this. All right. Oh my gosh, here we go, guys. I know you're ready. Look, it's Sigmund again. Sigmund Freud, psychoanalytic theory. This is going to be a good review for everyone. And psychoanalytic theory is very important because Sigmund Freud marked a turn of events for our field, because prior to Sigmund, and there was no talk therapy. I mean, people were witches, burned at the stake, exercised for maybe mental health issues they were having, committed involuntarily to asylum, whether or not they really had a problem. A lot of times men who wanted to do away with their wives would just commit them, and there would be nothing wrong with them. And so on horrific conditions, which we recall from the history lesson that we had in Foundations, right? With the, anyway, okay. This is like really hard to do, to just record this, looking at it, just me in here. But anyway, here I'm going back. Personality structure. You remember the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is governed by pleasure and instinct. The ego is governed by reality and logic. And superego kind of comes from our parents and society and stereotypes, and it's governed by society and morality. And the ego, remember, mediates between the id and the superego. And then the defense. You need to know those and the defense mechanisms. Those are big CPCE and NCE questions. They like to ask all those. So make sure that you go ahead and memorize those again, because I'll probably ask you some of those on the quiz, but Remember that they are these defense mechanisms are used when we have anxiety while we're attempting to keep that id and super ego in balance. And there's a great description of all of these in your text. I'm not going to spend time going over each one because there is a beautiful definition of each one on page 42 and a beautiful example of each one. No sense in me just reading that to you because most of you already know that and learned it in theories. And also again in group, we talked about it. So, and then of course the psychosexual stages. Again, you will need to know these in detail for the CPCE and NCE. And why am I so focused on that right now? Because our students just took it. I know that Erickson stages and um, Piaget stages and these stages, the psychosexual stages, any definitions like this are going to be really important for you to go ahead and memorize, put your note cards for your studying, highlight it, but this is very important. These how the personality forms. This is what Freud thinks is how the personality forms and created throughout this 5 psychosexual stages. The oral, which is the sucking and the eating, and that's where the trust and security are formed, akin to Erickson's right stages. So sometimes you'll be called to compare and contrast, or there'll be a tricky description in the answers. So making sure that you are really clear on which one is which. Anal stage is received from controlling excretory functions, and the phallic is characterized by the children's fascination with their genitalia and bodily functions. Freud theorized that children deal with unconscious sexual desires for their caregivers in this stage. The Electra complex is when girls unconsciously yearn for fathers, and the boys unconsciously yearn for their mothers in the Oedipal complex. So the latent stage is more of a calm, stable phase that lasts from age 5 until puberty begins, and is marked by a calm after the torment of those earlier years. But finally, the genital stage is from puberty through the rest of your life. And that's where your conscious and unconscious behaviors manifest or come out, right, as a result of the early childhood experiences. So really good information, just a good review for everybody here. You guys should be well on your way with all of this. Because then we have the neo-Freudians, right? They liked Freud and joined with him, but then they branched off because they didn't agree with everything Freud was doing. Remember those early meetings in the Psychological Society we talked about in Foundations? One of the main differences for these theories was that they began to emphasize interactions and that interpersonal relationships. So that's really important for you to remember, not just intrapsychic unconscious events. These are also still insight oriented. The unconscious is still a part of this, but the relationship is very important to them. So Carl Jung is the father of analytical, and Adler is the father of individual. In analytical psychology, he didn't want to focus exclusively on childhood. He wanted to also Jung wanted to focus on the later adult years. The primary goal of Carl Jung's analytical psychology was to achieve individuation, which is really similar to self-awareness or, what is the word that I'm going for? I should probably not record these lectures in between 7 sessions with clients, but we shall see how I do here. It will come to me. It will come. Okay. But that integration and expression of one's conscious and unconscious, your balance, your healthy and your optimum wellness. Carl Jung also uses a lot of myth and legend, the archetypes, the archetypes remembering the persona, the shadow, animus, always also on the test. So good stuff in this chapter to prep you and prepare you. So you really have a good grasp on all of these terms and theorists. Alfred Adler, he is individual psychology. Remember, he was really into social interest and purposeful behavior. His approach is considered teleological, which is goal-directed. So it's not just this unconscious sitting on the couch kind of free expression, but there's goal-directed, all behavior is goal-directed. And the relationship's egalitarian. There's equal. And his work focused more on the conscious than the unconscious. He believed that individuals did have their own private logic, which is their own way they believe and think about the world. Um, he theorized that by examining the faulty logic, that you could help clients have meaning and not feel inferior. Popular methods include birth order, sibling relationships, and early recollections. Also in here are Karen Horney. Oh, yeah, hello. Karen Horney, Harry Sullivan, also Neo-Freudians, and important to note because you need to know them. Karen Horney, it's usually full of males, and luckily she's a pioneer female analyst. She reworked and reframes Freud's notion of penis envy to suggest that instead of envying male anatomy, women in fact seek the privilege, power, respect, control, and esteem traditionally offered to men. Horney proposed that individuals employ three coping strategies: postures to protect themselves and provide safety from anxiety. People are helpless, compliantly moving toward each other, or aggressive, moving against others, or detached, moving away to avoid hurt or abandonment. Please make sure you read that and you understand those strategies. Again, these are all theories that we don't spend a ton of time on, but these are very important things you need to know about each one of them for your examination. And then we have interpersonal theory coming from Henry Sullivan. He believed that relationships between and among people serve to form personality, and were the cause and cure of psychological problems. And I have to say, I agree. Most of the time, people coming in do have a relationship issue. They're having trouble making relationships, keeping relationships, toxic relationships. And Sullivan used the term parataxic distortions, which is a pattern of skewed or irrational perceptions that we have regarding other perceptions of them. People have regarding others' perceptions of them. And so that you can see this early development of almost like CBT, right? Because that's a skewed belief, and we believe a lot of things that aren't accurate. So you see that coming out in CBT later on. Okay. Right. All right. Can't say enough about Erickson. We'll talk a lot about Erickson. I use these psychosocial stages all the time when I am assessing clients. Often, what we think as maladaptive might just be a normal stage of development. I see people who are just retired. I see people who are in their adolescence or young adulthood, and they're finding themselves, right? And so sometimes to normalize that for a client is very healing for them. Know these in and out. Memorize them now. You will have 17,000 questions about them, probably from me and probably on your test. So, not probably, 100% going to have questions about this. I cannot say enough about how you need to know each one of these. Often in my trauma work, these stages haven't been met throughout the entire development up until they come to me. It's very interesting because they weren't ever able to get to trust, to get to autonomy, to get to initiative, etc. And when we go back and we do our work and we go back into the memories and the different parts of their personality that are basically stuck in that stage, we create resolution to the left side of health. So we create trust in our relationship and we help the younger parts of the person begin to trust. We create autonomy. We help them to become autonomous and individual and trust themselves to be okay alone. And through that then comes initiative. So I find that very interesting. If you want to think about it that way, think about who people get stuck and the clients you see in practicum. Think about where are they here? They may be way back, they may be in middle age, but they may be back in early childhood, right? They may be filled with shame and doubt, and that's their whole identity. So really helping people. You can see people in later life coming in and they're in despair. But why are they in despair? So we have to find out what the root of the problem is and how do we get them to go into integrity? How do we motivate them? What are you going to use to do that? The next theorist, I don't know if she's in there, Jane. Jane. Here's Jane. Jane has 9 stages. Okay, so she's a different theorist for development. And growth and development relate to how individuals respond to new information and environmental interactions. So here are her 9 stages. So just kind of know that there's not too much on her right now. The next one is Arthur Chickering. There he is. Went too fast. Arthur has a non-sequential vectors instead, very similar to Erickson. However, they are not sequential. So you can go through a few at the same time. You can be at like multiple vectors at once. And so it's a more universal way of looking at the theory of identity development. So you see his stages there, the 7 stages, very similar to Erickson. And now I want to bring us to case example 2.1 of Bianca. I want everyone to read this case. So unfortunately, when working in mental health agencies or hospitals, there's sometimes a tendency to refer to clients by their diagnosis instead of by their names, a distancing and dehumanizing practice. This is often the case with individuals diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and I can attest to that. People with borderline features are very commonly trauma survivors. In fact, I will tell you about 89.9% have at least a part of their personality that's borderline, which means they have difficulty regulating emotion and maintaining interpersonal relationships. They're often very empty. They're often self-injurious. They're often suicidal. They may have a ton of those defense mechanisms in 2.1. They try to cope, and it's unbearable for them because they didn't get their needs met in their development. So let's take Bianca, who was referred to a local psychiatric hospital after attempting suicide. She's 15, lives with mom and stepdad, who has been emotionally and sexually abusing her for years. Now, Bianca displays behavior that's labeled as defiant, unruly, and oppositional. She sneaks out of the home, smokes cigarettes and weed, cannabis, and often gets into fights at school. She states she's a horrible person and wants to die. Instead of focusing on her defense mechanisms, interjections, acting out, splitting, her behaviors, right? She's trying to survive. So go back and look those up. Professional counselors are in a unique position to screen for trauma. So you would want to know, okay, if you've got somebody with these behaviors, you want to do a trauma screening. And we're going to promote recovery by addressing what could be hidden and shameful, making her not feel that way. Hopefully, as you learn in these classes, you will never do that incorrectly, and you will always be kind and look at the big picture. All right, let's move into sociocultural theories. Lev Vygotsky was a sociocultural theorist in the late 1800s to early, about 1934 is when he passed away. He came up with some important, interesting theories about socialization. And so the zone of proximal development is basically what kids can do in a certain period versus what they need assistance with. And the scaffolding is how you help them get to that next level of whatever it is they're going to do. So if you have children or babies, you know that you have these levels of development, certain things they're supposed to be able to do by themselves and things they can't do yet. And then, kind of to gauge where they are. And also, there's also this private speech that helps us, where we talk aloud to ourselves to help us guide ourselves, which is actually a sign of intelligence. Um, really big socialization is very important for cognitive development and learning from Vygotsky. Oh, and then Murray Bowen, you're going to learn about him in MFT class with Dr. Muller. He's marriage and family therapist, and this is the theory, one of the theories for that, marriage and family. Murray Bowen came up with multi-generational family systems as a theory, and he talked about how our prior generations affect our future generations. He really wanted people as a goal in therapy to gain that differentiation of self, separating from your family of origin and distinguishing yourself as your own person with your own thoughts, your own individuality as separate from the family system. And we don't have that. We become very enmeshed in that system. So very, very important theory, and you're going to learn more about that in the future. Also, another part of that of family life cycle development is genograms. So you did those, and you're going to do them in the family class. I think I cannot remember if you guys have had that yet or not. We've changed the schedule so much. Maybe I don't think you have. I think that was the other class. Other camper. So those are those pictorial representations of the family system. They're used in family systems theory, and very important part of kind of graphing out and showing those relationships, attachment issues, etc. And Bronfenbrenner, we talked about him already. Remember in chapter 1, we had the great diagram with the different impacts of the different systems on child development. You're going to need to know Bronfenbrenner. You're going to need to know that in and out. That's very, very important. It's called the bioecological model, and those interwoven structures and how they impact each other with the different levels, the microsystem, the mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, chronosystem. And there is a case example of Marcus here on page 47 for that. I'm not gonna read that to you, but I suggest you read it. Oh, look, I got ahead of myself. Genograms, done. Multicultural theories of development, very, very important. I haven't had the multicultural class yet, but I know that you are aware of some of these. We did these in foundations. So very, very important that you understand these going forward, especially in the lifespan development class. So the first one is white racial identity development, developed by Helms in 1990. One thing to say about all of these models before I get into white racial identity development is to make sure you know that most of these models are discontinuous models. Remember in chapter 1, we talked about continuous versus discontinuous models. That we progress through each stage over time. We can remain at one stage, or in a subsequent stage, we can without moving into the following stages. So it's important for you to kind of understand the type of models that we're going over. So with white racial identity development, it's an evolution in abandoning racism and developing a positive identity. And these are the stages that she came up with. So number 1 is contact, and that's you're oblivious to the issues of race and identity. They don't know about their privilege. They don't think race matters. You hear people say, "Oh, I don't see color. I have a black friend," that kind of stuff. That's an oblivious person. So that's when we're oblivious about privilege. We don't even privilege is to not even consider privilege. So that's contact. And then disintegration. So something happens and you start to kind of question. You're having that cognitive dissonance or some conflict, anxiety, or guilt because something happens that you see. Maybe right now we're thinking about us watching the TV and Ahmaud Arbery and the young woman that was killed, and now just another man. I mean, I feel like there are 5 cases in the past week, and I can't. His name escapes me. The guy that the 4 cops just killed, awful. So maybe you see something like that, and you're like, that seems wrong, or you come into work and you see someone discriminated against. When something starts to happen, you start to disintegrate, and then reintegration. You may actively or passively covertly believe in white superiority and dominance, but you start to acknowledge you start to acknowledge it. You start to understand that that's an actual concept and it's real. Then pseudo-independence. This is the beginning of defining a positive white racial identity with an emphasis on intellectual understanding. Immersion. We replace old misinformation and stereotypes with accurate. Changing from a marginalized individual to changing other white people. And whites are able to continue commitment to understanding and acknowledging racism and privilege. We exhibit the ability to understand complexity of race and welcome cross-racial interactions. So this is our stage. If you're a white individual, this is your stage of development, right? So this makes a lot of sense probably to a lot of us in the program because maybe you were at the stage, and it doesn't mean it's a bad thing that you're at that stage. Sometimes you just didn't know. You were unaware. I mean, it's not, and I think sometimes in this program, it helps us to sometimes for people to become aware of these things, which is a great thing to see that development occur. And then we have Black racial identity development. So this is one of the first theories of Black racial identity development, and it served as a model for others. They've adjusted over the years, but the following stages were pre-encounter. Whites are primary reference group, race is not salient. People have limited awareness of racial oppression. An event helps a person reflect on race and racial identity. New views are now inconsistent, similar to what we just went over. Immersion consists of dichotomous thinking that rejects whiteness and now embraces Black identity. Black identity and internalization is now you're appreciative, flexible, love yourself instead of a hatred of others. You're secure in your identity and open to those who are different. And then in that internalization commitment, this is where you start speaking out. You're more involved because you're able to have conversations about oppression and advocate, just like autonomy in the white racial identity development one. All right, and I've got biracial next, and then multiple heritage. Let's see how we're doing here. 5 or 6 more pages, guys. You got this. Y'all might want to take a break in a minute and pause me before I get into classical conditioning, because we do need to make sure that you understand that. So, yeah, you may want to pause me at some point, take a little walk. Too much. It's a lot. It's a lot for you to. I'm trying to make it funny or quick as much as I can, so that you guys will listen to it. First of all, here we go. We got Poston here in 1990. He developed the biracial identity development model. It's suited for people who identify as biracial. So they have, that's how they identify. And those stages are personal identity, internalization of values and prejudice, and identification with reference groups, choice. They push to be with a particular group and may be alienated and by the other. Could be a crisis. I've seen people in therapy for this. Enmeshment and denial often yields confusion and guilt about choosing a group to belong, which may not fully encompass their full heritage. So if you think of someone who is, Japanese and maybe African American, those are very different cultures. And so trying to figure out who am I, and how do I appease both sides of my family, and who do I want to be, and what parts of each culture do I want to be part of who I am. And that lends itself to appreciation, when you can start to value and learn both sides and appreciate who you are and integrate them all into your stable identity, who you are and what you want to take and what you don't, what you want to keep and what you don't. All right, multiple heritage. This is when someone has multiple facets, right? And it's a different view. So they have parents and caregivers of multiple different races, right? So if you think about it, you could have grandparents who are Latino and African American, and your mom could be from them, and your dad could be identify as maybe Caucasian, and then you're born. So now you have multiple different backgrounds, right? And it could be even more than that. That was just an example. So multiple dimensions to who they are, which I think is pretty cool. But they were able to integrate over time who they are from all of those different cultures. All right. Now we're getting into, I make sure that you read Reflection 2.1 on my own racial identity development. I think before we go any further, I want to go ahead and do a reflection for Chapter 2. This is coming from the supplemental text. So again, this is my way to ensure that you're going to listen to these. So I'm going to read a case study, and then I'm going to ask you a couple questions. I'll expect the forum response. I will not write the question in the forum. I will take the forum response in the forum for Chapter 2. Jake Manowski and his daughter, Marilyn. Jake Manowski had been widowed for 6 years. He still writes letters to his beloved wife, Anna, keeping her up to date on the events of his life. In the following letter, Jack writes about a small episode, but a lot is revealed about Jack's life, his sense of self, and his relationship with his adult daughter. Dear Anna, I'm writing this from a coffee shop. My seat is by the window. Why, you are thinking, am I sitting in a coffee shop when I have a perfectly good house to sit in? Okay, I will tell you. Marilyn, our dear daughter, may she have a long and wonderful life. This dear child of ours, who is no longer a child, decided last month to cure me. Cure me of what? I do not know, did not ask. One day she came in, a day no different from any other. I was sitting in the living room watching the television news. Marilyn went in the kitchen to empty her grocery bags. Dad, she said, how about you need coffee? It's decaffeinated. What does this mean, decaffeinated? I asked. Then I said from my chair, why should I walk into the kitchen? Unleaded, Dad. You shouldn't be drinking regular coffee. It's a diuretic. By this time, she was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, folding her paper bag. It means it takes too much water out of you. You're too old for that. No, decaffeinated, diuretic, too much water. Let her do what she wants. What did I care? I forgot about it. The next day I got up, I fed the birds, I read the newspaper, and drank my coffee. No big deal. That afternoon I had a headache. And what a headache. Loud and pounding. I could not think. This was not so new to me. Headaches. They come, they go, but this one was different. Next day it was still with me. The next day, like a black cloud, it filled my head with thunder everywhere I went. When Marilyn came on the third day, I remembered. Marilyn, this decaffeinated coffee, however you call it, is killing me. Ha ha, she laughed. It's not killing you. It's good for you. It's murdering me. Go buy me some coffee, or tomorrow you will be pouring this decaffeinated coffee on my grave. Dad, she said, you have a headache. You'll get over it. It's not the decaf that's giving it to you. It's from no caffeine. It'll stop soon. She laughed again and she was gone. This is what she does. Comes into my house, checks things off her list, and disappears. I sat down. Okay, I said to the floor, I will buy my own coffee. Okay, that's the case. I want you to analyze the case. Explain the usefulness of the concept of a family system in trying to understand the relationship of Jack Manaske, his daughter Marilyn, and his deceased wife Anna. Also, hypothesize the ways that the macro system may influence Jack and Marilyn's approach to food, nutrition, and health. Okay, so the family system, how could that concept be useful in understanding the relationship of Jack, Marilyn, and deceased wife Anna? Hypothesize the ways the macro system from Brothenbrenner may influence Jack and Marilyn's approach to food, nutrition, and health. You may want to go back to chapter 1 just to review Brothenbrenner and macro system. So I expect that answer in the form for chapter 2 for your credit. Okay. All right. Biological theories of development. We're winding down here. Of course, we've got the theory of evolution, which comes from Darwin, and then natural selection, which refers to the differential reproduction or process whereby certain traits or characteristics of a species that are more adaptable to the environment survive, right? I talked about the finches, Darwin's finches. You remember their beaks changed because of the type of food or berries they were eating. You remember that from, oh, my child's like, you hear my child out there? He's playing with planes. Ecological theory. Basically, ecological theory is the fact that same species share that innate need to survive and to promote the survival of the species that we all share. Take this theory and then understand that John Bowlby and Ainsworth, who developed attachment theories, were building on that ethology in their theoretical development, because that's what's most important here. Bowlby and Ainsworth. You got to know this. This is so important. Every client needs to be evaluated for this in some way, shape, or form. So we've got Bowlby. He developed his theory while working from home in a home for maladjusted boys. He observed the disruptions in the mother-child relationship and how that could lead to later psychopathology in offspring. This has been proven time and time again, right? And there are 4 phases. The non-focused responsiveness from birth to 3 months, when the infants cry, smile, and make eye contact with anyone with whom they come into contact. These behaviors sustain the attention of others and therefore their proximity to the infant. Phase 2 is discriminating attention. This is when babies begin to focus their social responsiveness to fewer people, and they're less responsive at this point normally to unfamiliar people. The primary attachment figure begins to emerge, the one that they're wanting. And then proximity seeking behavior from 6 to 24, you become that secure base for the child as a parent or caregiver, and they will display that proximity seeking behavior. So they may call out for them or go a certain way and then turn around and come back. And then reciprocal after 24 months, which is 2 years, the child begins to develop an internal mode of attachment. The child begins to understand the parental intent and envision the parent's behavior during separation. Bowlby believed that these attachment relationships have a very sensitive period between 6 and 24 months, that if those phases are not met appropriately and with the right needs being met, then issues will come later in life. Ainsworth conducted a naturalistic study on mothers and infants. Bowlby Ainsworth believed that when individuals feel a strong attachment, proximity seeking system engages, and individuals will want to be with the attachment object no matter what. So this is that study with the strain situation. You guys remember from undergrad psych, or everyone's probably heard of this situation. So the children were observed for 20 minutes while the mother and a stranger entered and left the room. And they postulated 3 attachment categories. And then a 4th one was added later, which is that disoriented attachment. At the bottom, you may not be able to see it. So you have the secure attachment, the insecure, which is anxious avoidant, and the insecure, anxious, ambivalent attachment. I think, like I said earlier, I make sure that you know all of those attachment areas. But I think before we get into the learning theories, that I'm gonna stop this. I think I'm gonna pause it. I'm gonna stop this and do a separate lecture on learning, just a short one, and maybe that'll help you break up a little too. We got the maturation theory, which is when believed that heredity was largely responsible for child development and parental influence and had limited impact on the development of children. That children mature following an inherited timetable and they develop skills and abilities in a preordained sequence. Developmental milestones. This is where we get them from, and this is the different categories of those developmental milestones. This is exactly what you see when you go to the doctor when you have children. So this is where we're going to stop. I'm going to upload this, and then I'll do learning as a little supplemental lecture. Give you a break.